The man who's getting ready to live in a box because he made his son live in a box basically ice skated his way out of the courtroom during sentencing because of how light the judge went on him. And we're going to talk about that and the sentencing in today's video. Hello Sofa Squad and welcome back to the old sofa. The old sofa's back there, but you'll notice the little spots empty on it. The old secondary sofa for Roscoe. That's because Roscoe's right there. I can see him, but you can't. That's how he wants it right now. He doesn't want to be a TV dog right now, and I have to honor those wishes. Anyways, my name's Paul if you're new to the channel. Now what we're going to be talking about today is the Tim Ferriter sentencing. This just took place, depending on when you're watching this, a couple of days ago. So he was sentenced. Tim and his wife are the couple who, well, Tim has gone to court. Obviously, he is found guilty. His wife will be going through her, judicial journey next. Tim was found guilty and sentenced. Now, what he was found guilty of was essentially building a small box prison type thing in the garage where he made his son live. The son would have to use the bathroom in a bucket. There was abuse, but not in your typical way that you might see. And so that made this case very awkward, but yet heartbreaking at the same time. And we'll hear the judge talk about this when he's addressing Tim and the final words and stuff during sentencing and whatnot. This is not really your standard abuse case, but it's still really out there, okay, with what he did, and seemingly, that his wife partaked in too. Now, one thing about this case as well is that Tim was offered a plea deal for a couple of years. He did turn that down because he would have to testify against his wife and whatnot, and so he turned that down. He took it to trial. He lost. He was facing 40 years. So remember that number, 40 years, because he didn't get anywhere near that. Now, what we're going to do is I've picked out just a few pieces and clips of the sentencing that I want to make commentary on. And we'll do just that. We'll go through, we'll watch them, I'll make some commentary, and then do kind of like final thoughts and words at the very end of it. Now, if you do want to follow me, outside this little world here of the YouTubes, you can go on over to the Instagrams. It's on the screen right there. Go on, give it a follow if you want. Mr. Roscoe's over there too. He's the most interesting thing about it. So what I want to do first is watch a quick little montage of a couple of people that spoke, because one thing the judge did mention during this is that, he had a big showing of support, Tim, with people who came out, spoke for him, wrote letters, that type thing. But I just want to look at a couple, his mother, a pastor, and we'll talk about it after we watch the clips. Now, also be warned, y'all, the audio in this hearing right here, you want to talk about drinketh from the cuppeth, y'all. The audio was so horrible. I'm going to try and level it out and that type thing, but it was coming from the court. Like, nothing can be done about it, basically, of what I understand, people, moderators and stuff talking. So just know that when you listen to this, if you're having headphones, don't get blasted out. Just be warned that the audio is very different for each of these clips with the way that people talk into the microphones.
Taught classes at St. Christopher Catholic School where all the Ferriter children were enrolled. And in particular, Tim was in the 8th grade when I taught a course in Spanish. He was a very good student. In 1993, when I was assigned to another parish in the Martyrs in Everglades Park, Tim's family had moved to New Lenox, but I continued to remain friends with the entire family of the 8 children. I celebrated 5 of their weddings, and I presided over the wedding of Tim and Tracy Ferriter. I also baptized some of the children.
Whenever you're ready, Maureen.
Okay, good afternoon. As you know, I'm Maureen, mom of Tim Ferriter. Well, I say I don't condone Tim's behavior. That behavior was atypical. Tim has always been a loving and gracious son. He was never a problem and never really got into much trouble. I'm imploring you, Judge Coates, to show some mercy on Tim. I'm going to be 74 next month, and I would like to spend some time with Tim before I go.
Now, one thing that I thought was interesting about this is, number one, here's this pastor coming up going years back, right? So for Tim to be able to get all these various people to go up and speak to him, is interesting, right? Because oftentimes we see in some of these cases where the perpetrator will be the only one that can, speak for themselves, you know what I'm saying? I'm specifically also thinking of Rosenbaum trial, where she had, the postman was the only person who would get up there and talk to her. Mind you, she killed her daughter. There's that. Now, his mother getting up and speaking, I would expect that. And, her stance of, I'm going to be 74. I'd like to spend time with him and this, that, and the other. I really don't think that probably held too much weight with the judge. I mean, of course, there's that, but this kind of stuff falls on deaf ears when you're talking about someone who has made really poor decisions that have affected someone, especially a child, a minor, his child, and will have long-lasting effects. So it's like, well, I'm sure you do want to spend some time with your son, but he made a really, really bad decision, right? And that has consequences to it. So let's go ahead and move on to hearing from the actual man himself, from him, Tim.
I want to start out by recognizing that all my kids have been devastated by this entire situation, and I'm very sorry to them that they've had to go through this.
Now, again, I told you, the audio is crazy, right? So do with what you got to do while listening to him speak, because it was, whoa, mama jama, next level. Now, he's apologizing to his kids, putting them through all this. Now, we're going to hear from the victim himself here in a few minutes. His sister, one of the daughters, got up there and she read Tim the act. I mean, she called him out on his behavior, so that's the thing. And the judge will even mention this, which is like, essentially Tim has this temporary, trauma going on right now with, obviously, you're going to prison, your family's been torn apart, whatever. This has implications that stretch generations and lifetimes, because of the decisions that him and his wife made as to how they were going to handle this situation, which was not that bad, okay? Even the judge will make note of this behavior was just almost like a cycle of, because of, I think the judge said, because of what Tim was doing, it created the behavior, right? Because there really wasn't anything horrible going on before that. So, anyways, we'll wait to get to that part. Obviously, I feel very strongly about it. So I'm glad to hear him apologize to the kids, but the rest of his speech kind of falls on deaf ears.
Mama and I have lost all your kids, and all you have kids also have lost your parents. Sorry. Take your time.
Now, of course, here he is. He's getting emotional. He's crying. You see the people in the audience on his side, right? He does have a lot of people who have shown up. Very emotional. And one thing that I really felt throughout this is with Tim, people in there, his people behind him, whatever, and the judge will make note of this too, is there's this overwhelming sense of almost like, well, what I did wasn't really that bad. And I think Tim will say in a minute, it was out of love or whatever. The enormity of it doesn't seem to really sink in.
I'll give two examples. If at 2 a.m., my wife or I got out of bed to attend to take care of a crying baby, Fiona, Ronan, Noah, or Pierce, that act of getting out of bed to take care of a crying child is not necessarily for the benefit of Tracy or myself. It's the benefit for the crying baby. Another example, a family of 6, we as a family of 6, Tracy, I, Fiona, Ronan, Nola, and Pierce, would routinely visit nursing homes. We would ask to visit the elderly people who never got visitors. Bringing the kids would always burst with smiles on the faces of everyone. This act was primarily for the benefit of the elderly people in the nursing home, not for the 6 of us. Everything I did was out of love.
And here you go. Everything I did was out of love. He cites these 2 examples. I do believe that there was a sliver of him actually believing that. Now, like the judge will say, though, his actions also show that he knew it was over the top because he was trying to hide it, as well as Tracy. I think there's a kernel somewhere buried in there in him of tough love, this is how you man up and that kind of a thing or whatever, but it got way out of control. Now, I'm not trying to condone his behavior because we'll talk more about what my thoughts are on what he did, and if you've watched my videos on it, then you already know, because I don't agree with what he did at all, and I think he's right where he belongs for this, to learn the lesson that he needs to learn for doing something this careless with a child's life that will have lifetime implications. But here you see the reasoning and what I just said a minute ago, which is there's this level of they don't really see anything wrong with this because it's like, well, this is out of love. This is like basically just this is how you do this. And maybe this is all he knows, And that's where it's like, we still haven't learned, like, there's so many other options of tough love, right? That one could do, especially when they have the means like this family did, before you get to the place of building a prison in your garage for the child. And then this is not to talk about the verbal abuse, hands on the throat, that kind of stuff. This is just the basic box and the garage part of it, okay? This is not the other stuff. So that's the part that is concerning about this. And obviously he will be reunited with his family at some point. So hopefully this can sink in over the next few years of why he is where he is at now. And he can learn that to move on.
I thank you, Ronan, for your honesty and courage when you spoke of mercy a few weeks back. Ronan, you're my first boy.
I mean, he's having a hard time getting through this now. Getting real emotional. That whole thing about, he brought up that mercy thing, right? Because he's in the back of his head like, let's get to the have mercy on me part. Which, he gets a sweet deal.
Ronan, keep up the curiosity and the desire for learning. I love you always, and please know that you'll always be my boy.
Now, as you hear him say, you'll always be my boy, the victim has gotten up here and spoken very highly of his father. And in fact, we're getting ready to listen to him speak about that, and he'll continue on with the things that we're getting ready to hear. So let's use this as a segue to hear what he is saying now. His dad's been found guilty. It's sentencing. What does he have to say?
I came here today to see your face again. It might be the last. So let us make this right.
Now, I forgot to say before we started, go ahead and get your tissues, get your little paper plate. I actually don't have a snack on me. So I usually have a paper plate with food because, well, you know me at this point. Good Lord. But it's very early in the morning and I do have my cuppas right here. So that being said, I usually use the plate to fan off when I start to cry. So this is a tearjerker, y'all. This is a tearjerker to hear what this child has to say, or this young man, I should say. Because the emotional maturity of him, it gives me goosebumps for what he's been through. So I just want to preface that with that. So go and get ready to do a few little tear sheds and let's jump on in.
Well, it's because behind this monster of madness, guilt, anger, and wrongdoing, I see a soft spot. I see what you truly are. I know that hiding in the darkness of fear and blame, there's true fatherly love. In the exact same spot, there's nurturing. I believe that it can still be activated. We just need to excavate the corrupted parts of your heart.
I mean, my God, y'all. I mean, I've got major goosebumps right now. It makes my eyes water, y'all. Just to hear him talk like that, right? It breaks your heart. And at the end of the day, I mean, that's his dad, right? He's still a minor. He's still, I don't want to say a child, but he's a child, right? And to have that kind of compassion and to, really that maturity for him to be able to look at it and really kind of sum up Tim, and really just look at it like, you know what, I think that you're A, B, and C. He sees the multifaceted, multi-layered part to his father. And that part fascinates me for a child to be able to articulate that as well as this young man has.
That is true and false. I do want to talk about you. That's because I still love you. And I'll always love you. Until the end of my days.
Oh my God. Again, hearing him speak like this, and you just have to think, and the things that he'll say, and again, I've just pulled some of the clips out, and I don't know if I have this in here, but at one point he talks about him missing his father. I'm sure I have it in here. We'll get to it in a minute, but if not, I want to talk about it now while I can think of it. Missing him, wondering what he's doing, and that kind of thing. And then if you think back to when you're young or whatever, maybe even now you think this way with your parents, and almost like the breaking up of the relationship is what it sounds like here, because remember, he's gone, he's with someone else now. His dad's going to jail, obviously. No telling what's going to happen to the wife. The family's been broken apart. That's what I'm getting at. And so to hear that heartbreak come through his voice, because no matter what, no matter how bad he was treated by his father, how scared he was in that box at nighttime, he still has that love, and we so often see that in these cases because that's your parent. That's all you know. There's the world they created, and so there is that in there. Do I think that Tim loves his son? Yes, I do. On some level, there is that within there. But just like he said, that seems to be buried within a lot of darkness, and it came out in this very bizarre way or whatever. And the judge will even mention where it's like, clearly there was happy times with the family. There's evidence of this, so it's like, well, what happened? Where did this go off the charts at what point? So anyways, let's continue.
I want to say that you never left. When every day passes since we last made contact, I feel like everything is slowly taken away from me.
I mean, can you imagine being the parent and sitting here hearing that? I feel like everything is being taken away from me. This is a young man who, if you didn't follow this case, he ran away at one point, and then he just showed back up at school a few days later, and they were basically like, well, hello, we have to get the law involved, like, what happened? And he's like, I just didn't feel like I was loved, and you're just sitting over here as an onlooker with your heart on the floor, and so to hear him saying this, you're just like, oh my God, this poor boy. And then looking at Tim, who, again, I'm not in his head, I don't know him, I don't know what's transpired since all this has taken place. But remember, it's just been very recent that Tim has actually had his world truly messed up by being, incarcerated. He's been out of jail the whole time up until he was found guilty. So we're talking like, 3 weeks maybe or something like that, like a month or something. I can't remember when it was, but he has not been incarcerated long. So there's a feeling of, oh my God, my life has changed, life is over, that type thing, because his body mannerisms, him putting his hand down, this shows regret, remorse, but is that authentic? I mean, I don't know.
I want to say I miss those brown eyes. I miss knowing what you're doing. I also miss knowing how your day has been. I keep on thinking about you, whether I'm in a good mood or not.
Okay, this is the part, y'all, that really got to me. When he's like, I want to say I miss those brown eyes. I think about you. I mean, oh my God. Again, Matt, this is having your parent ripped away from you. And he is expressing this, and in such a poetic way, right? I mean, I don't know how the judge was able to not cry through this. Okay, hearing a victim, because so often too, a lot of times in these cases, unfortunately, the victims, they're no longer here to speak, or it's such a minor that they're not going to, get up and say something like this. So it's kind of a rarity to hear, number one, and this is in a good way, the victim survive, and then actually get up and speak at the sentencing like this young man has done. It's so brave of him, and then just so eloquently put this mixed bag of emotions that has to be so confusing for him.
But we got to remember that a mistake was made, and trauma lasts. It could burn through people's brains, souls, hearts, and destroying everything in its path.
And this is correct, and I do feel like, I agree with the judge, and we'll hear this later on, is, when the judge is like, look, I understand, the victim is forgiving and wants this or that, but he probably doesn't have a grasp on how long this trauma will last, which could be a lifetime. And it sounds like he has an inkling of it. But one thing that goes through my mind when I think of this is I'm like, this young man has a whole life ahead of him to see this play out. What it's going to look like when he gets into those relationships, or he moves out on his own, has his own children, and these nuances of having to have lived what he lived through plays out in your everyday life. And I think that that's when he's going to probably go on this roller coaster ride of emotions over his father and his father's actions to him.
It creates pain. It creates suffering. It creates hate. And the last thing I want to do is hate. A lot of people dislike you because of your actions, and some have feelings of hatred. However, I still love you, and I will continue to love you for the rest of my days.
I mean, this child has so much grace and mercy in his heart for his father. And, it's so true. Like, all these people hate you and da-da-da, and I want to, remove myself away from hate. Being older, I sat here listening to him, and I was just like, my gosh, to be able to get back to that, To listen to a younger person speak from the heart like that, being older and having seen so many different things in the world that kind of harden you up, it really spoke to me in that way, to hear the openness of his heart and of his feelings.
But how do I feel about you? I feel sad. I feel sympathy. I feel hope. But most importantly, I feel forgiveness. Other people may not think that.
And there you go. I mean, at a certain point, as we all know, forgiving can set you free, to release your own self from whatever that might be. And, to hear him mention all these different feelings that he's feeling, I can only imagine that all of those are present. And like I said, they'll continue to be, right? Because there's going to be times where I just keep going back to thinking of him when he has his own kids, and, he's in that moment of, they're really trying my nerves, or, how kids can be or whatever. And that realization where he'll be thinking, well, wait a minute, I'm the same age that my dad was at this point. And at this stage in that game, my dad was making the decision to build a box for me in the garage, or making me use the bathroom in a bucket, and my parents tell me to go out to the yard and dispose of it, but don't let the neighbors see. And that realization right there. Now, I'm not trying to say, oh, he shouldn't forgive him or he'll change his mind, but it's those little moments right there that I think throughout his life are going to always come back, and be there. It's a lifetime thing that he will now have to experience, unfortunately.
But I do. In that, I hope you can gather yourself and try to follow up on the consequences of your actions. Just remember that I'm still your son, no matter what. And always remember that I'm still a Ferriter.
And still a Ferriter. And one thing that would be interesting, this would be a case that would be interesting in 20 years, where are they now, kind of a thing, to see if their relationship has mended, where that stands. Because once we get to the sentencing, you'll hear that, it's going to be a minute, right, before there's any kind of real contact and whatnot. So again, I would like to see where that is. Do they mend that bridge, and what does that look like if so? Now let's go ahead and move on into the actual sentencing. And I've pulled out several clips that I want to talk about with what the judge has said, to kind of recap and just go over some things.
I suspect that whatever I do today will probably make everyone unhappy, because it's going to be a decision that nobody gets what they want, and sometimes that's probably the best approach by the court.
Woo, and he was not just whistling Dixie on that one. Okay. Okay, there was definitely a lot going on. Now, before we get into the rest of it, what I want to say is this, okay, when I was watching this is what I was expecting. Remember the 40-year thing, it could go up to that? I was thinking a couple of things. Number one, I was thinking, what if he does some kind of a mixed type sentence that reflects how many years the victim lived in that box? Then I was like, you know what? He's gone to trial. This happened. I was like, I'm thinking a 20-year sentence. I'm thinking the judge is going to come in halfway, and not 20 years incarcerated, but some mixture of 10 years incarcerated, 5 years probation, 5 years something like that, but a mixed bag of 20. Okay, so just know that's where my mind was going into it. Let's continue.
And the reason I mentioned that is because there were plenty of opportunities. This wasn't a one-day deal or a two-day deal. This was a situation that occurred over a 6-week period in the state of Florida. And so what that tells me is that there were plenty of opportunities that the defendant had to reflect on whether what he was doing was wrong.
Amen, brother. And it's the truth, okay? Just go back, if you haven't followed this case, go back to luckily the whistleblower of this situation, the contractor who built the room in Florida, who was like, okay, at first this is supposed to be an office, but then they changed this and that and blah, 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 all the way down to the very last thing of, oh yeah, by the way, could you reverse the locks? Put the locks and the door handle on the outside of the door. And he's like, middle-aged white dude, nice house, building an enclosed thing in the garage that's locked from the outside. You already know what that looks like, okay? Of course he called the police, thank God, right? So that right there shows you. Now, first of all, then here's my next question. Who in their right mind would have a contractor do that? who in their right mind, why would you do that? You know what I'm saying? Thank God he did, right? Because it tipped him off, of course. But all these little things, don't let the neighbors see you, pour your waste out in the thing. Let's go hide the bucket before the cops come. And these were decisions made by both he and his wife. Remember, she's going up for trial next, okay? She should be nervous, okay? She just saw what happened to her husband. So I'm so glad the judge mentioned this, because there were so many chances to stop and think, and I think that they did, and that they knew it was wrong.
I mean, I've looked at the redemptive qualities that the defendant has, and he doesn't have a prior history. He has no criminal background, and he has experienced a loss himself in terms of the utter collapse of his family and having all of his children taken away.
And that's what makes this a unique situation, because, no priors, all these people there to support him, victims speaking up for him, the son, and whatnot. And so it makes it, just odd, unique, right? Now, this doesn't alleviate the fact that what he did is still, doesn't matter if you've never done anything before, this one thing, it was not good, right? So, I mean, I get that, but I'm glad, again, that the judge mentioned this, because it was like, well, look, this is a good example of this multi-layered thing where at some point this was a happy family. They had these moments and probably still had them throughout, but clearly something went off in left field where these horrifying decisions were made and this abuse started and whatnot. So anyways, let's keep going.
I will say that whatever the sentence is that I impose in this matter, it will be for a defined period, and it will come to an end. And at some point, the defendant will have the opportunity to try to put his life back together. And I get it that his life has been turned upside down.
I'm also glad that he mentions this, because what he's talking about is, Tim, although it might look like his world has fallen apart, and it has, let's just be honest, the family's separated. And you hear the testimony of the son, the daughter reading his rights, the whole 9 yards, right? So, but that will come to an end for Tim. He can walk back out and restart over. However, what's been done to the victim has been done, and it's a lifetime commitment, right? So it's like this, when the sentence comes, it's like you have to balance this out of like, look, Tim, kind of sucks, because also his actions have punished the entire family, okay? Not just him being incarcerated, although I'm sure it sucks for him, right? But I mean, that's what it's supposed to be. But this, what he did affects his child. It's a trajectory, right? I mean, this is the kind of stuff that can make another person become the abuser. I'm not accusing the victim of doing that, but I'm just citing previous examples where we see this type of stuff, where behavior repeats behavior and that type of thing. So it's like you have to sit here and look at it and be like, you've created a trajectory, a defining thing that can last this person the rest of their life. So, the scales of justice have to balance out to that.
Most, if not all, of the problems were caused by the defendant himself and his discipline of the child.
And let's talk about that for a moment, because literally, when you start looking into what's the stuff that the victim was doing that was so horrible, and you're like, that's it? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's it. And this is how I explained it to somebody else. If you've seen like Dr. Phil and like Catch Me Outside Girl, all these notorious like trouble teen people they have on there, this doesn't hold a candle to that. Now, I'm not saying, okay, we'll go build a little prison in the garage or Catch Me Outside Girl and whatnot. But I'm saying, when you sit here and look at like what will push somebody over the edge, and it's like, this was Tim's breaking point, this behavior, and then the behavior that started to escalate more was clearly a direct result of the abuse that the victim was getting at home. Of course you're going to act out if you're being made to live in a prison in the garage away from your family. Who wouldn't?
Can I look to the mental status or situation that the defendant was experiencing and use that as a possible basis under the catch-all provision that would give me the ability to downward depart?
Now, another thing in this sentencing is that the defense has they did a downward departure hearing, which downward departure basically is a thing to allow the judge to take in certain evidence or discretions and go outside the sentencing guidelines. Now, if you watched the sentencing, I mean, and trust me, y'all, this is like, 30 minutes worth of stuff here? Y'all, it was hours, okay? I'll talk about my thoughts on the defense. at the end, because at the very end of it, I was like, well, she's probably laughing all the way to the bank, I guess, because I mean, honestly, sure, she got her client a sweet deal and it worked. Because the process leading up to it, I was like, oh my God, this was like a whole other trial. It was taking forever, but that's what the judge is talking about now. He's kind of marked out some of the reasonings that she cited, which one of them was essentially, almost like the child's behavior caused this type situation, to just very quickly sum it up, which he's like, yeah, and no on that one.
I do think that the defendant probably came from a disciplined environment, having grown up in Quantico, and maybe that's all he knew.
Now, here's one thing, and we're about to hear what I consider the bombshell part of the judge's statement as to why he gave the sentence he did. But before we get to it, this thing that he just said about he grew up in this Quantico, that I can 100% see that and agree with that, right? And again, I'm not giving Tim like, oh, okay, so, yeah, pat him on the back. No, not at all. Because plenty of people did that and would not make these choices that they did with their child, right? But I do think that like the palette for what Tim was coming from was this very strict, black or white, yes or no, 1 or 100, nothing in between, kind of, a mindset of discipline and whatnot. Toughen up, be a man, this is how it's going to be, that type stuff. And so I think that had a huge part in some of his decision making. Again, does not make it right, but I just think that it is what it is type thing. But let's listen to this next thing that the judge says now, and we're going to talk about it after.
Having been a Marine, I know how Marines operate, and I know how disciplined the environment can be.
Okay. So, when I heard that, I was like, there, and then, obviously you get to the sentence, I was like, there you go. And his decision to acknowledge and go outside the sentencing guidelines per downward departure. So here's the thing. So the judge, I've been a Marine. I know what that discipline is like. It was almost like he gets it. Now, again, clearly the judge does not agree with Tim's behavior, right? And he will say the sentence he was going to give was way bigger than what Tim ended up getting. But that part right there where I was like, okay, so there's this level of he knows that. Like there's some component of this militant disciplinary type thing in this case that the judge is recognizing and is familiar to him and is part of that's where Tim was coming from. So we're going to take it into account with the sentencing. That type thing. Again, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, or if you agree with it or not, it just is what it is, because I think so many people were shocked at the sentence.
Ultimately, the state is requesting 15 years, and I think the defense is requesting 1 year based on the motion, followed by probation. And I do note that I can go all the way up to 40 years.
Okay, so before we get to it, remember, I was thinking 20. State wants 15. The defense wants a year and some probation, okay? And he can go all the way up to 40. Okay, so let's just get all on the table. So remember, when I'm watching this live, I'm like, it's going to be 20. Yeah, because he's kind of working you up to thinking that. Like, no one's going to be happy. And I'm like, he's going to split it in half. Well, then he says this right here. I'm like, okay, so where is this going?
I just wish he'd have been a little more forceful in getting the point to me that he actually acknowledges that what he did was wrong. And I didn't get that. I still didn't get that because I have some sneaking feeling that if all things being equal, the defendant might say that he would do the same thing over again because he thought it was the right thing to do.
Okay. So remember, the judge is talking about like he was a militant thing, all this type of stuff, but then flip that coin. You can be all those things and not make these decisions and see right and wrong. And 100% he's right. The way Tim talked, it was like the next words out of his mouth were going to be, and I'd do it all over again if I had to. He has not grasped the severity of the actions that they did. I don't know if his wife has at this point, but it's like for Tim to speak in that way, it was still, this was out of love and I had to do what I had to do kind of a thing, and that's what it was. And it's like, well, honey, we expect the parent to love the child and we expect tough love, but this is like so many things could have gone wrong, right? In addition to the trauma of the abuse, but then also it's like, and you had so many other options of stuff to do. Like, you had the world at your fingertips. You financially could do so many things. And this is what you chose. There's serious issue with that.
I'm going to downward depart from 75 months to 60 months, and followed by 5 years of probation, 2 years of the first 2 years of probation of which will be in CC2. During the term of probation, the defendant is not to have any contact initiated with any of the 3 older children. Those children will be free once they reach age of majority to have contact with the defendant if they so choose. In any event, even if the children so choose to have contact with the defendant, they will not be able to do so until the defendant has first completed the following conditions of probation. I'm going to require that the defendant undergo a 40-hour anger management class, which can be taken while he is in custody, that he undergo a 40-hour parenting course, and that he also undergo a mental health evaluation.
Okay, so 60 months. Woo, Mama Jama. Okay, along with some probation, the stuff he can do, incarcerate, all that type of stuff, right? When I tell you my mouth hit the ground over that, because again, I was expecting 20, and then that number lessened once the judge talked about like that they want 15, they want 1, and so then I was like, you know, granted it's like a 10-year type sentence, right? But the 5 years incarcerated, I was honestly surprised. I was expecting 10 years incarcerated, and then like another 10 mixed around with some stuff, probation, this, that, the other, right? I was expecting him to put him away for 10 years. I was expecting him to go away for 20, you know, because like when this happened, I was like, oh, dude, you know, I was expecting almost near 40, right? Because I was like, when you make them go to trial and they offered you a deal and you're like, no, we're going to trial, and it's something like this, no, you know, it's never good. So the fact that the judge did this right here, I was like, oh, whoa. Okay, let's talk about a few things. First of all, so I was talking to my friend Matt about this, and he doesn't follow true crime. So it's like I have to kind of explain the case to him. When doing so, you know, it's so interesting because literally off the rip, so many of his questions were the same ones that we ask each other here at the sofa. You know, and he's like, and he had some other ones I didn't even think of. You know, and he's like, well, why the standard, like, why didn't he do A, B, or C? Did he reach out here? What kind of adoption was this? You know, all these things where it's like, how, like, what could you do before you get to the point of building a prison in the garage? But then he even went one step further where he was like, well, if you were going to do that, why, and he had all this money, why didn't he like put him, like literally make him a literal apartment? Like, why didn't he just make it like a conversion, you know, and almost have like a parental, like, place in there, you know what I mean? So say you turn your garage into an apartment with a room for one parent, and then, or a bed or whatever, and then the child, if the child is that much trouble, so that you can take turns and swap out to, if it's, we're having to protect the child from the rest of the family, well, a parent can be out there. Why not have a bathroom out there? That type thing. And I go to this thought process I saw, and I cannot think of it right now, but I just know the documentary I saw about this couple that had like these kind of, they had a family. These were not adopted children, but I think just natural born, you know, their children or whatever, that they have between the two of them. And one of them turned out very behaviorally, I mean, like next level with so many things going on. Well, they ended up renting an apartment across the hall at their apartment complex to live separately. And they would literally take turns, like, so that they had this whole system because they could not trust this girl around her younger brother, I think it was. And so, does it sound miserable? Yeah. Okay. But like, and these are working, you know, class people. I'm not trying to say the Ferriters aren't, but the Ferriters were clearly more financially better off is what I'm getting at than this particular situation I'm thinking of. And so you could have done anything. You could have made the self-contained apartment and switched things out and rotated things instead of this whole thing of like, he's literally living in this militant prison, you know, with no bathroom and no AC for a while, you know, and you're controlling the lights and he's sitting in the dark and, you know, the screaming and yelling and the hands in the throat and all of it. It's just so next level. So Matt's like bringing these questions up, like, well, what did they do this? Did they do that? Did they reach out to these services? You know, that kind of thing. So it was very interesting in that way. I agree with the judge. I don't think at this state and time, I think that it has not faced. I mean, Tim knows it's wrong because he's going to jail, right, or prison. But this is not like he would do it again. He would 100% do it again, right? Like, it's just hasn't even phased him. I don't know how the family, where do you go from here? The daughter got up there and spoke, and she did not have anything nice to say about him, right? I mean, at all, okay? The mother's getting ready to go to trial, unless they say, look, we'll cop out to whatever just to avoid the cost of the trial. I don't know if they'll do that. But where do you go with that? Again, I just come down to with this. I don't know how either of them, Tim and the wife, were able to close their eyes and fall asleep at night. Imagine your kid being in the garage, locked in something. Because part of oftentimes I've talked to people about this case, and they're like, man, when I was a teenager, I would have loved for my parents to have, built me an apartment in the garage. I'm like, well, that's one thing, an apartment, right? This was not an apartment, okay? This was not you come and go from it and you have a bathroom. Like, this was like literally a little prison cell that you didn't control anything in it, all the way down to your body functions. And so that's the difference, and so that's where it just blows my mind that I'm like, how could you sleep at night? What if the house caught on fire? And then at minimum, imagine making your child dump their waste in the backyard and how you would be thinking that made that kid feel. That part it sends me over the edge. It sends me over the, that's the part that just haunts me, is the otherness that he must have felt. And he said he didn't feel loved. Like he's a burden to the family. So he ran away. Don't blame him. What else do you think would happen, right? So anyways, so the sentence, do I agree with it? I don't know how to feel, because at the end of the day, I'm not a judge, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a jury, right? I literally was thinking 10 years. Incarcerated and a mixture of whatever. That's what I thought was going to take place. So basically like a 20-year sentence. I get the judge saying that, Tim's going to walk back out and integrate back in with the family. So basically we need to prep him to anger management, parenting classes. Here's the rules of contact with the kids. Here's this and that. All that has to be set back up. You heard the victim saying that they are going to be, always a Ferriter, I love you, always will. So he clearly wants to have a relationship. So all those things are going to have to take place. That being said, it'll be interesting to see how it goes. I think 5 years is a cakewalk, okay? He should consider himself so lucky to have gotten those 5 years. So lucky, okay? Honestly, I felt like it was unheard of. I was like, really? That's it? But again, I'm not the judge. I'm not there. I don't see all the information for the case. I'm not there for the nuances of it, sitting in the courtroom, doing all that kind of stuff. Again, it's final say for him. And probably wants to avoid appeals and things like that and whatnot. So yeah, for me, it was a shocker. I'm not going to lie, it was a shocker. We'll see. Do I think it could change? I think everybody has the capability to. Now, when you get into talks of people who've committed, heinous murders, major abuse, this is a personality type that's willing to go to this level with a child. I hope they can change. I hope they can see out of that. Whatever, like his son was saying, whatever darkness has encompassed his heart, I hope he can peel that back while he's incarcerated, so that his family can maybe get a good version of him, right? Like whatever they had at one point. Of course we want that for everybody. So that's it. Let me know what you think. First of all, if you watched it, my God, did it not take forever to get to it? It was like a whole other trial going on. It was like 3-4 hours, and the defense going on and on and on. I was like, oh my God, I can't handle this. But let me know, what were you expecting? Because that's what was so interesting to me, because we were in a chat room chatting, the Sofa Squad and I, and talking about what was going on. So seeing what other people's, expectations were of the sentence versus what we got, kind of a thing. So I'm curious to know what were yours and what do you think of the actual sentence. Anyways, that's it. If you're still watching, I greatly appreciate it. Roscoe's still under the covers, y'all. I don't know what's up with him today. It's Saturday morning, so he might just be lazy. So anyways, drop him some sofas so that he can come out and play with us in the comment section. And until me and him go scurry on down that comment section to hang out with y'all, we'll see y'all there.